One of the big issues in the camps that are springing up across Port-au-Prince like this is the risk of disease. The sanitation in places like this is not particularly good, as you would imagine, because they have literally sprung up in the few weeks since the earthquake. But in order to try and counteract the risk...
The purpose of an As Live is to put across, hopefully, some compelling television, but also to keep the amount of time that you're working on putting that television together to a minimum. So, for instance, in the case of Haiti, where we had an awful lot of work to do, very few people on the ground, it was a good way of putting together 2.5 minutes of TV that then BBC World and others could run throughout the day, that gave the viewer an illustration of what the story was about, but left us the time to get on with news gathering.
I mean, if we can just wander over here.
Yes.
I mean, presumably one of the big problems is, as I mentioned at the beginning, the sanitation and the weather's
yes.
going to change as well.
Well, it will probably rain. We have a little...
Now, the preparation from an As Live can either be relatively minimal or quite a lot. In the case of Haiti again, the earthquake story was pretty obvious. What it was about doing was describing to the viewer what was going on and what it was like to be there, and hopefully meeting some of the people affected. So the preparation is relatively minimal. Perhaps find someone to talk to, somebody who speaks English or the language you're broadcasting in, and bring them into vision to talk to them. But at the same time, often with a visual story like an earthquake, it is possible simply to switch on the camera and to describe your surroundings.
So, as you can see, it's a difficult situation here. It has been improved somewhat, but there are big fears about what happens here when the weather changes, and many people fear it's simply going to get worse.
It gets a bit more complicated if you're doing a story about economics or politics, something like that, where you really need to think about what the information is you're going to put in. But think of it a bit like a 40-second radio voice piece. What facts would you put into those 40 seconds? Expand them slightly and you've got your 1.5 minutes As Live.
Well, this is another place, and then as now, Carlos the Carpenter from around here showing me around. Careful here.
A crucial thing is to work well with the person behind the camera. They need to know what you're going to do, because the most compelling As Live has some movement in it. So for instance, if I'm standing in front of a camera and point, oh look, over there's a building that's fallen down, then you need to know that the camera person is going to start looking at it.
This is a house.
And the house is the same.
Yeah,
Nothing's been done for it.
nothing.
Essentially, think of it like this. The camera in an As Live is the audience person that you are talking to, the person watching back home, and the camera needs to move around as if it's a person that you're simply talking to in the street.
Everywhere you go across Port-au-Prince at the moment, the problems are acute and they are obvious. We've just been driving down the road and happened upon this large group of children who we're told have been out here for the last 3 hours waiting for some food, but the local organisation which is trying to provide them with some food hasn't got any yet. They're still trying to buy it.
You need to have a little bit of discussion with the camera person about what you're going to do, where you're going to move, how long it's going to take, so that they can get the best shots. But at the same time, try not to over-rehearse it, because the point of these is they are not scripted television. They are a show and tell. They're an explanation to someone. And if you rehearse it too much, perhaps if you have a guest, then that guest is simply going to sound a little bit dull, a little bit boring. They're going to have a lack of spontaneity when they answer your questions. So try not to rehearse it too much.
We're going to try and get a word with one of the organisers here. If we can just slip through and get through to Jean Livabien Edumé. Monsieur, c'est quoi les problèmes maintenant? What are the problems at the moment?
Bon, le problème ici, c'est que nous avons beaucoup de problèmes.
We've got lots of problems.
Premièrement, nous avons des problèmes de nourriture.
So food is the first problem.
Now there's a couple of ways that I think As Lives work best, and that is when you lead the viewer essentially through what you're going to do. So for instance, if you're talking about the destruction in an earthquake, you might say, so let's go and look down here because there's an example here of an apartment block that was flattened in the earthquake and many, many dozens of people died inside it. That way it leads your viewer to what they're going to see, and they're not suddenly struck with an image that to them means nothing because they're not there on the ground with you.
So there's nothing for people to get a normal sort of living standard. Et les autres problèmes maintenant,
Les
monsieur?
autres problèmes, c'est que pas de logement.
Nowhere to
Vous
live.
voyez comment les gens sont ici?
Yeah, he's pointing out that one of the facts that we've seen everywhere, which is people are living in shacks. They're living in very basic accommodation, nothing major. Et aussi, monsieur, les autres
Nous
problèmes?
n'avons pas de
The
toilette.
same applies for talking to guests. If you're going to start speaking to someone, don't have them hanging around in the back of shot for 15 seconds while you talk about them, because they're going to look a bit stupid and it's going to be distracting to the viewer. Try and position them somewhere where you can slowly move away from what you're talking about, the collapsed apartment block, and say, but we've managed to find this survivor, for instance, and here he is. He's just standing over here. Let's have a chat with him. That way, I think it's a lot more fluid and it leads the viewer through the ASLive a lot more easily.
Monsieur, bonne chance. Merci, monsieur. Bonne
Merci
chance.
à vous deux.
Okay, so you can see the problems are acute, and the people here in Port-au-Prince are trying to help themselves. There are lots of aid workers across the city, and they are making a difference, but they're not making a difference at the level at which it is desperately needed for children like these and for many others.
I think the best bit about an ASLive is that you're not constrained in the way that perhaps you are with a 2-minute television news report. That you almost follow a set formula of putting in voices of people, a bit of script here and some pictures there, and it doesn't really allow you to explore what that place feels like. The ASLive does allow you to explore that. It allows you to walk down a street and talk about the smells or the taste on your tongue. It allows you to talk about how you feel about being there, what it's like to stand next to an apartment block in which many dozens of people have been killed. And it allows you to give an impression of what it's actually like there on the ground. This isn't, I think, editorializing. It's about transporting your audience to the place that you're privileged to report from. And if you do that in an ASLive, then it will be compelling television.